Hi everyone, I'm Suma and this is Manori Sumanasinghe. She's a designer and an entrepreneur working towards her California licensure in architecture. She's also a co-founder of NEUMA Being and volunteers at IAC, International Academy of Consciousness.
Hi, Suma.
Hi Manori, thank you for joining in. I've been really looking forward to meet you in person because I've heard so many great things about you.
Oh, thank you. You're too kind. Thank you for having me here. It's my pleasure to be having this chat with you.
And from what I gathered from your bio, you've been working on the subject of consciousness for a very long time. When was the earliest you started your explorations in this subject?
I got started when I was 11, so I was just tiny, just following my mom around to some of the meditation classes she was taking. So I was born and raised in Sri Lanka. I grew up at a time, unfortunately, there was a war going on. So from before I was born to the time I left Sri Lanka, I actually experienced Sri Lanka during this conflict that we had going on. And then when I was really, really young, I got to experience the horrors of the war. We saw like, there was a point where the city that I grew up in got bombed. On the way to the school, there were bodies of people who's passed. And so there was a lot of violence that I kind of came across. I was also, at a very young age, sexually abused. So these two experiences kind of like catalyzed me trying to find meaning in life as soon as I started sort of getting a grasp of the world around me. So started asking sort of the bigger questions of what's the meaning of life and needing to make a sense of my place in the universe and the stuff that's happening around me. And the first place to sort of turn into was the sort of like the religious upbringing that I had, and my mom was into studying the philosophy and going to the meditation classes, so I kind of tagged along with her. And then I got into, so I was trained in the Theravada Buddhist tradition under some of the bigger names at that time in Sri Lanka, some monks, some teachers, and got quite deep into it. By the time I was like 16, I started studying the philosophy quite in depth. And then so me asking those questions early on, the questions sort of multiplied and they got deeper. Obviously not as articulated as I'm asking the questions now. But there was this sense of like, okay, really needing to figure out what my place is in the universe. And started it as like needing to look for hope. And then I became more and more intrigued and curious about what it is to be alive, what it is to be a part of this bigger sort of the universe that, you're like a speck of dust, but what does that mean, So in my early 20s, I got to study at the International Academy of Consciousness, study about energy, out-of-body experiences, but other parts of the consciousness that I had not gotten exposed to in my Theravada philosophy studies, and then got into other philosophy things. So that's sort of been the journey. So for 29 years of my life, I've sort of been in this field, studying different aspects, different traditions. And I realized what I'm essentially doing is understand myself. Like, it happens together. Understanding myself and understanding the world around me happens together. They sort of feed into each other. So I'm now very much away from looking at it from a specific philosophy, but like trying to just take in as much as I could and apply it to myself so that I'm sort of like the guinea pig of everything that I'm coming up with. I test it out on myself, whether it works or not, and then I share it with the world.
Yeah, that seems like a really best approach to test consciousness, because sometimes people may make some big claims about this is possible or that is possible, but the best way to find that out is test it out yourself and see if it's true or not.
Yeah, and then the thing with any philosophy is that what I find the most interesting is how I'm able to apply it to myself and to the world around me. And whatever the bigger claims we make about life, it is not as impactful if you kind of apply it to your day-to-day, right here, right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's like we can believe in whatever theory we have about, or the philosophy we have about the bigger structure of the universe and life. But if we are not coming up with our own code of how we want to be and what we want to be in that whole system, I think it's sort of just theory without practice, you know. So, yeah.
Can you walk us back to your 11-year-old self when you started these explorations? What were some of the things you discovered and how your curiosity kind of opened up from there?
Yeah. First of it, actually 11 was so far away now, you know. I'm 40 now. I can't exactly remember what happened when I was 11 when I started the journey. But I do remember some experiences that I've had that I was like, whoa, this is big. I don't know what it means, but it's something really exciting and curious. So I would just, go to these meditation classes, sit there, try to follow the instructions and sit still and observe and meditate and do all of those things. But then a part of it was developing my own meditation practice on my own at home at night. So sometimes, after dinner, I would just switch off the light and then try to meditate, stay still for a few hours, and then try and be reflective. One of the first bigger experiences that I remember that kind of changed it for me was that finding myself in lotus position in my bed, just meditating. I don't remember exactly how long into it, but I started feeling that I'm growing and expanding, and all of a sudden I found myself at the ceiling level looking down at everything in the room, and I was it was exciting because it's wait, this is a different view of of the space that I'm in, of myself. Because I was brought up Buddhist, the idea of reincarnation and seriality of life were not something new. So I was already familiar with the idea of I'm not just the body, I'm more than that. But to sort of experience that, seeing the body down there and then seeing everything from up near the ceiling, it was wow, that was, I remember having that experience and thinking, oh, this is pretty big. I have proof now, evidence for myself. And then I asked my meditation teacher the next time I saw them, and then he was oh, that's really great. That means you're really getting close to having some deeper states. But don't get distracted by the colors that you see or the expansion that you see. I was okay. So I kind of put it back. But I kept having, even as a child, actually, I would have spontaneous flying experiences. I'd find myself playing on the roof of the house that my parents were building. And I have very visual memory, so vivid memories of experiences of floating above and, doing things. And it's just not something that I kind of actively explored. And then when I came across the IAC and started learning about out-of-body experiences, I was like, oh, this is what it was. Kind of like made sense back then. But it took me a while to realize that, because it was just like, oh, it's something that happens. It's probably distraction. So I should just let that go and just be here, focus on my breath or whatever the technique that I was doing. So it was a transformative experience, and I kept having experiences like that, like seeing colors and, having this insights. But it was just not something that I actively pursued at that age.
And then when you joined IAC, that was more like, did that give you like a frame of reference of like why these things are happening?
Yeah, I think it's like, I think now as a 40-year-old woman, I'm not trying to conclude anything anymore. I think when I was younger, I was like looking for that answer, And now I understand every little thing that we do and every little thing that we learn gives us a better picture of the bigger picture. So it was just like coming across the IAC in 2003 and taking the CDP classes gave me a part of the puzzle that was sort of like missing before. And that was I think that was a pivotal point, because a lot of things started making sense. But it also, I think the biggest thing with me coming across the IAC was that existential anxiety that I had before of needing to look for answers and not being able to get there, that frustration was somehow lifted. This idea of it's okay to have these questions and to have more questions than having answers became okay. And I think that was sort of like a bigger thing from taking the CDP. And then, so I was visiting the US in 2003 for like 6 to 8 months. And then I took the CDP, went back to Sri Lanka and returned to the US to study architecture for after 3 years. So it was that period sort of like taking it and integrating the stuff that I learned at the IAC and realizing what is the path that I want to set for myself and my future and what I wanted to do with my life sort of became clear a little bit more, and gave me clarity of where I need to put the energy, So yeah, I would say that's a big step for me at that point in 2003 when I came across the IAC.
So as a volunteer at an organization of IAC, if someone asks you what is the nature of consciousness or what is the nature of reality, how would you... I know it's difficult to put it in words, but if you had to describe it.
I think this is the framework that I've come up with based on everything that I've experienced. And I think this partly has to do with the fact that my background is in architecture. I have now come to a point where I feel like there are 5 parts of us. So the physical body, the energy, emotions, mental aspect, and then the environment. I think when we think about consciousness in the Western world, it gives you a false sense that consciousness is just awareness. But consciousness, to be a human, is more than just awareness. You have a body. That's an asset. It gives us energy, it gives us a platform to be expressive, to make things, interact with people, build relationships. So that's a huge part of it. There's the energetic, the life force that we carry within ourselves that allows us to do things and be ourselves and be creative. And then there's the emotional and the mental aspect that allows us to feel, to process, and express everything. And then the environment, which is, it's one of those things that it's reflective of who we are, like the immediate environment around us. It's reflective of our inner world, and the inner world gets affected by what's around us. So it's one of those like feed into itself things. Whatever you create around you begins to influence your psyche, your being. So in terms of consciousness, I think I like to use the word being instead of consciousness more, because I feel like it's a little bit more all-encompassing. There's the being as in the being, but being as in, you're being this. So I think there's a lot about the consciousness that we still have to know. Like, I think all these things that we are doing, all the consciousness researchers doing, everyone who is trying to understand themselves, it's a sort of making a contribution towards understanding the consciousness, the nature of consciousness. And the reality that we live in is also deeply impacted by how tuned into yourself you are. You become more and more aware of the subtleties around you. You become more tuned in to everything. It's like energy, More trained you are, more refining your taste in any field, actually. Even when it comes to like food, if you constantly expose yourself to well-cooked, well-presented, well-composed dish, your expectation now becomes higher. You become more and more sensitive. I think energy is like that. And I think that's a thing with the consciousness, that more we expose ourselves to different kind of conditions, different kind of scenarios, more subtleties we are able to pick up. So I know that's not directly answering the question about the consciousness and the reality, but this is sort of my understanding of what it is. And I think there's a lot more that we have to learn, that we want to be paying attention to. And I think it's, to a certain degree, it's also a very personal journey. You can arrive at certain ideas objectively, but a lot of the things with consciousness is very subjective. Like, I can't tell you this is how you should feel. It's how you feel, whether I tell you or not, So I feel like we need to sort of get comfortable with the idea there's an objective part of it, there's also a very subjective part of it, and it's okay to be like existing in between.
Yeah, I think you explained it beautifully, because sometimes and it is a difficult question, it's hard to describe, and sometimes there can be, with spiritual teachers especially, there can be a tendency to only point to the absolute reality versus relative reality. It's both, it's not one or the other.
Yeah.
So
I think that it's a trapping whenever we start talking about absolutes, because it implies that you've stopped looking for answers. Like, that's one of the best things about approaching things with curiosity. You are never assuming this is the conclusion, this is the absolute end of it. And I think that opens up many more possibilities for us to investigate and look at other ways things could happen. And I think it's important because, like, think of the universe. It's so vast and so complex. And it's really easy to come up with an easy explanation of everything and be done with it. But is that all? Like, are we going to be satisfied with, okay, the simple explanation and that's it? But what if we can learn more if we just stay open and curious and don't get hung up on the absolutes? And like that process that I went through of like sort of not getting so frustrated about looking for the answers, but rather enjoying the process of asking the questions, then everything is so much more interesting and more, it's vibrant, it's full of life. I mean, life, we are not here to just be and suffer. We are here to learn and grow. And that process can be enjoyable if you just stay open to the possibilities.
And this next question, Manori, I know it's not just about experiences, but just for fun, like what was the most adventurous experience you had that kind of like made a big impression on you?
I've had several ones that I've sort of like, that I consider like big milestones. So like the one that I said when I experienced the expansion, that was definitely a bigger milestone, or like a, marker. And then when I came to the ISC and started learning all these experiences and all these techniques, and started to try out. So the consciousness development program at the ISC, how it works is that there's a part of it that you learn, sort of like the theoretical component of it, and part of it is application. You do apply some of the techniques with a instructor who's facilitating the experience, and you get to try it out. So one of the times that I tried it out, the very first time actually, I found myself able to apply the technique, and I partially sort of like came out of the body. I was a little stuck, but there was a sense of, oh, so there's a clear differentiation between the physical body, the mental body, and something else that's able to get out of the body. So what that was, I think that realization that there are other aspects to being than just the mind or the body, and there are all these other things, that was a pretty pivotal point. I think in the recent past, one of the bigger things was that we were visiting some of our friends in Colorado, and we'd been hiking, and then came home, hanging out, had dinner and all, and then I was getting tired, so I was going to go to sleep. While Nelson and my friends were talking in the living room, like I could hear them talking, I was falling asleep. So I got to that state in between awake and asleep, which is the hypnagogic state. And it was just like, weaving in and out. So it was like merging of the reality with sort of like a dream world. And there was a point that everything that I've been working on in my life, like all these different aspects, like my architecture design career on one side, all the work that I wanted to do to sort of uplift the community around me, and the volunteering that I was doing at the ISC on one side, and then me as a person trying to grow and be like, just be a better version of myself on another track. So I was like, during that state of hypnagogia, I managed to collect a lot of dots, and then all of a sudden things became clear. Oh, there's this piece of furniture that I was working on the side, technology that Nelson's been tinkering on the side, this consciousness interest, design, how I want to uplift the community, sort of like clicked in that state. And it was like, oh, and that's the idea that eventually became NEUMA Being, the wellness tech company that we are working on right now. It was not an out-of-body experience, so it was not a, like a massively, immediately transforming in that sense, but it was a very significant experience for me, because while I was in an altered state, I saw how I'm combining everything. And I think for the majority of my life, I've been trying to reconcile different parts of me, and it was not until that point that I was able to see how I'm able to bring everything together, and that was pretty cool.
Yeah, that sounds like a big, like that would leave a big impression on a person, to be able to see those aspects of yourself.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I came out running from the bedroom. I was like, hey guys, I had this idea. Let me sketch and show you. And I was like sketching, and I could see everyone getting excited about it. And more people I talked to, people started getting excited about it. And so I had the experience in 2016. I was still working in an architecture firm at that point. But slowly I started making progress. And then 2019, we actually made a full functional prototype of that, and been getting people to come and test it out, and been getting good feedback. So I definitely know now I have anecdotal, but I have data that shows that connection that I made back in 2016 actually works.
That's really fascinating. So you have this refreshing experience of like you have spent time in the East, in Sri Lanka, and you have spent a lot of time here in the West. So I think it would be valuable to understand your perspective on how consciousness is perceived in East versus West, and how do you see those kind of integrating in future?
I think there's a lot of values in both cultures that I actually like and embrace, and I think it makes me a better person to be able to see things from both perspectives and to have experienced things from both perspectives. I think the key is to balance, though. There's a sense of community that's hugely important for the evolution of being, because I think none of us really grow alone. You know, if we want to evolve, if we want to develop, it kind of happens successfully when we are able to grow with the people around us. Unless you're like some kind of hermit, you know, like living up in the hills and you don't get to interact with anyone. In the modern sort of world that we're in, I think it makes more sense for us to think about ourselves as a part of a bigger system around us, and then looking for ways to uplift the people around us so that we all can grow rather than just one person rising. So that aspect of community is something that I value a lot from the Eastern background. There's also this idea is like, and maybe this is because I grew up in Sri Lanka and, you know, like island nation, so people are a little bit more chill. It's just like, it's okay. You don't get it right the first time, it's all right. Contradictory though, because we were colonial, country that experienced colonialism. There's also a certain amount of Western values projected into our culture, the one that we grew up in. So it's really difficult to understand where the boundaries are between the sort of like the ancient values of the Sri Lankan culture and the Western culture. So I've come to a point where I'm not too bothered about labels. I think labels allow us to articulate something better. But if we get too hung up on that, then we are just always looking to assign a certain value or put people in a specific box. With the Western culture, what I really appreciate, especially being here in Los Angeles, be here in the US right now, is this: until I came to the US, I never really experienced this sort of a notion you can do anything in your life if you want. And that really empowered me for me to experience that at 16 when I visited the US the first time. Growing up in a very conservative culture where girls are not always encouraged to do a certain thing or be a certain thing, it was really eye-opening to say, I can literally be anything I wanted to be. And there's this sort of individualization idea here to a certain degree that's good because it makes you think about who you are, makes you think about what do you want to be. And I think that's important. I think the key again is not to sort of get too extreme on any of these and be as balanced as possible and try to always question why you're thinking about something and why you're doing something. And I think the future, right now, the kind of world that we live in, there's a lot of crisis around us right now. There's the climate crisis, extreme weather patterns and a lot of destruction. Just last week, there's this crisis going in Haiti with the earthquake, and then there's the wildfires that are happening, like 108 major wildfires in the US or something. There were flooding that was happening in Germany. All these things are happening. And then there's political situations going on, socioeconomic things like justice, inequality, things like that. And I think, and I'm hoping, that these things will spark a bigger conversation about who we are as humans in the society and get us to question, why do we do the things that we do? I think that was one of the greatest things that happened because of the pandemic, is that we got to sort of stop a little bit. It was really tragic that so many people got affected by it, be it, becoming ill and passing because of COVID, or getting laid off because their jobs were not, it was not possible to do the work, and the economic impact that happened from it. Whatever reason it may be, we had to sort of stop and question. I think opportunities like that are rare. So while we are still in the pandemic, I'm hoping people will ask these questions more. And for me, signs that you get like the Great Resignation, that people are leaving jobs that were not fulfilling, were not paying living wages and so on. I think that is an indicator that it was not working for some people, and they stopped to ask a question, and they're leaving, and they're changing careers, and they're doing things differently. They're doing it.
And how do you see the interest in these topics, in East versus West? Is it is the interest in East increasing because some people complain about how there's not much of interest in topics of consciousness, ironically in East as much as there is in West?
When I was growing up, that was certainly the case. I haven't lived in Sri Lanka for 15 years now, so I don't know exactly what the situation is. But I feel like overall in the world there is a growing awareness. And from my friends, at least in my circles that I see on social media, there is a growing awareness of these fields in the East also. And I know they're still sort of trying to overcome the colonial mentality that was sort of imposed upon them during the colonial era. So there's a bit of work that needs to be done there. But it can only happen if they start asking questions. Where are these values coming from? Is there something that was really a part of our culture before colonialism? Or is this happening because we were taught to think in a certain way that served colonialism? So I think it's interesting how we find that people are waking up more in the West, and people are sort of still the certain set ways in the East, whereas the East, I think, is still struggling from the identity crisis that arose from the colonial mentality that they have to overcome on top of the other social pressures, So I think there are a lot of reasons why that you see that the East may not be waking up as fast as, we should, because we had all these philosophies before. But I think it is not that simple. I think there are a lot of layers to that conversation. And this whole, if you think about it, right, like in the 80s and 90s growing up, all the good TV that we show were Western TV shows. So the values that kids my age grew up with were what they saw on TV, what the books that they read. Everything communicated a specific value or specific set of values. Now for us to break out of that and sort of, not only address the trauma of the colonialism, but find our roots, that's a lot of work. And most of these countries in the East are not first world developed countries. So when I was in Sri Lanka, and this was not until I moved to the US that I realized there were a lot of things that were questions of survival that I had to tackle day to day. You don't have the mental freedom to explore bigger philosophical ideas about consciousness when you're in survival mode. So the context of comparing the two becomes skewed there, because you're talking about countries who are developed nations who have very healthy social economic systems, and then you're talking about countries whose social systems were essentially destroyed during the colonial period, and now they're trying to stand up, they're trying to get up, and most of them are experiencing conflict of some sort. Like Sri Lanka had a war, parts of India still has conflict with Pakistan, Afghanistan, it's all over the news these days. So all these countries have a lot of issues still, just from a survival point of view, infrastructure point of view. And then if we expect them to be at the same standard as the freedom that we're experiencing here right now, I think it's kind of a little unfair and a little not as compassionate, because we can't even relate to, like now when I go back to Sri Lanka sometimes, I find it difficult to relate to some of the things some of the people are doing, because it's just, I can't fathom those things here in my life, so I don't necessarily see that as a day-to-day pressing issue for me. And then I'm like, but can't you do it this way? And then they describe like, oh, because I have to do this, that, and I realize, oh, it's a survival thing. So,
Thank you for explaining it. So, like, it was easy to understand, and it's quite an insightful perspective.
Thank you. It's never an easy topic to talk about these things. I mean, to be human is that, isn't it? It's like we have all these complexities, and we are only able to see life through the experiences that we have lived through. So to be able to now see someone else's life, to be able to empathize with someone else's condition, it's very difficult, and it's sort of requires a little bit of bravery, because you're putting yourself out of your comfort zone, and all the growth happens outside your comfort zone. So just because these topics are hard doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about it. we should talk about them. But remove the emotions away and really look at it from curiosity, because we want to learn, we want to be able to be better as people, but also as a society. So try and include everyone instead of excluding people.
I was also curious to know, like, your personal transformation, like if you had not pursued these subjects of consciousness, or another way to ask is, like, how did these subjects help you transform from where you were at to where you're at now? Like, what was the impact of these studies and explorations? Would you be the same person if you had not been involved in?
It's funny. I feel like I'm not the same person that I was like even 5 years ago or 3 years ago. It's one of those things that I look back at my life when I was in Sri Lanka and where I'm here now. I was the first one in my family to travel abroad. My brother and I were like the first people to speak English. It's just such day and night difference. Like, I can't believe I did that, like I can't believe I'm here. It's been such a journey. I feel like if I didn't go down this path and if I wasn't curious, I probably would have been an ordinary person who, I'm not saying I'm an extraordinary person. I'm just saying that I can't even imagine, actually, if I didn't go down this path, what life would have been. Because I remember being an unhappy kid, and I can't remember not wanting to be better or out of that situation. And now I love my life. I love what I do. I love the kind of people that I've surrounded myself with, the work that I do. And I'm happier, so much happier than when I was young. So yeah, I can't imagine if I didn't go down this path, what life would have been, I know this has not been an easy path because there's been resistance all along the way to get here. But it's been very rewarding because I feel like every day I'm learning something new about myself. I'm getting to confront something that I need to confront in order to grow. There was a point where, not too long ago, before I came, if it was not today, and if it was like, 1 year ago, if I had to do this interview, there were certain things in myself, like perfectionism, that I would have had a real hard time. But today, I woke up, I slept in a little bit, so I didn't have a lot of time. I told myself, it's okay. I'm going to show up in my imperfections, and I'm okay with it. And I think that's the big step. People think like these transformations, these experiences, they're like big, massive moves. For me, there has been big, massive gestures. But it's the little things that happens in the day. And these little moments that I realize, oh, I am actually like okay with this, and I'm not beating myself up on that, and it's okay. And that contributes a lot to my well-being, my ability to remain positive and optimistic, and also continue to go towards the path that I want to go to, the goal that I want to go to, even though I can't fully explain it to everyone yet sometimes, so yeah.
It does open up like a lot of limitations, like because it gives you a new dimension to think creatively versus being stuck in smaller minded thinking. So and that kind of lightens up a lot of like, I don't know, even in little things, one can get a lot more relaxed and a lot more creative in doing the same thing.
Yeah, I wish I was this open when I was in architecture school. I used to have so much anxiety because I wanted to prove myself. I wanted to be as good as some of the kids who grew up here, who had exposure, had a lot of cultural influence, which I didn't have. Now I'm like, I'm me. There's only one person who can be me, and that's me. So if I'm not going to be myself, then I'm doing a disservice to myself, you know. And then one of the bigger growth opportunities came when I started questioning where my belief systems were coming from. So, for example, for the longest time, I felt like I had to do more in order to be enough, in order to be worthy of any praise, recognition, appreciation, to be admired, to be loved, accepted. And that led me to constantly trying to do and take on way more than I should, and I would run myself down. But after doing a lot of inner work, now I'm at a point when I'm reacting in a specific way that doesn't feel like my best self. I stop to ask, what's the underlying belief that's showing up when that's happening? What am I trying to do? What's my intention? Am I holding myself in integrity to who I truly am? Therefore, it's aligned with my path. Me being a person who is a creative, who loves to share, who likes to create things, that's sort of who I am, you know. And these actions that I'm taking, is that serving any of the things that I want to do and myself? So it's sort of like constantly checking in with myself and rechecking and double checking, you know, triple checking. But I think it served me well, and it started off as lack of self-confidence and lack of sort of self-appreciation, and now I'm like, oh, this is a part of my curiosity, and I'm confident in my imperfection with all these flaws that I carry, and that's okay, as long as I'm checking in with myself to make sure that it's aligned with who I really am.
It's like you are competing only with yourself and becoming your better version, versus like competing with the whole world, which is a whole different way of perspective.
Absolutely, you got that perfect. Yes.
Because you have this background in architecture, I would love to know your take on, does design have an impact on consciousness? Does it have an effect on consciousness?
I think intuitively I felt that even when I was young. So the kind of environment that I grew up in, you know, dysfunctional family dynamics and all of that, in my naivete, I thought if our environments are better, designed better, a lot of these conflicts that we are having will not be there. I think there's a certain truth to it even now. I really feel like how we curate the world around us really does have a profound impact on who we are. Now, is that an easy thing to explain? I think that's been sort of like my life's thesis, you know, like trying to sort of articulate how the connection between design and consciousness's evolution, how they work. And so far, this is what I've come up with. What I've come up with is that creativity and consciousness evolution goes hand in hand. For me, my expression of creativity is design. But I'm one of those people, actually my sort of like motto is that everyone's a creative, because we make micro decisions every day about how we wear our hair, how we do our makeup, how we dress ourselves, how we decide to present ourselves to somebody else, you know. These are all micro design decisions that we take. Decisions of creativity. Some people use creativity for problem solving. Some people use it in actual arts, you know, like making a movie or writing, painting, music, dance, any of those things. So I feel like design is my vessel. People have different vessels of creativity, like different methods that they express their creativity, but it all boils down to creativity in the end. Whether it's creativity in problem solving, like computer engineering, or like scientists trying to find a solution for disease, or physicists working out a problem in physics at a very abstract level, they're all creativity. So there's a definite sense for me that these two go hand in hand. I don't know if it's as obvious as it is to me for other people, but I still find it difficult to sort of fully explain it. My intuitive sense is definitely yes.
Thank you so much for your time, Manori. I know you said you're not extraordinary, but I want to say you are. What you shared today, it's quite powerful, and you brought in some insights that were refreshing and a really new perspective, which sure helped me expand as a person. Hopefully it does the same to the audience also.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to have this chat with you, and every time I feel like I'm having a chat with somebody else about these ideas, I also end up learning something new about myself. So this was really cool, and thank you for having me here. And I really appreciate the work that you're doing. I think it's really cool that people need to hear more people interviewing different types of people and bringing in different perspective to the table, because spirituality is not something that fits one size fits all. So the more kind of different conversations we have, we are able to come up with our framework of what suits us. And I think we need to do that more, because the world that we live in and the times that we live in requires that kind of independent, individual thinking and investigation, and coming up with, like, understanding that you absolutely have a choice to be who you choose to be. So take the time to figure out who you want to be compassionate towards yourself and others while you get there. And you, Suma, I really appreciate what you're doing, because it's giving a platform to a lot of people like myself who are doing this work on the side, and people can hopefully take that knowledge and do something with their lives.
Thank you so much. I'm really grateful. And this is an exciting time to discover more talent like yourself. Like it's a really great time where we are getting to see some new entrepreneurs like you, and I definitely want to stay in touch and watch how your work evolves, and we can reconnect at a further milestone to share some more of your insights and what you learned. So it's kind of like an ever-growing process. So
yes,
I would like to stay in touch with you.
Thank you. And I would feel the same. It's really, this is a time that we should support each other. So I really appreciate it. I admire the work that you do, and I hope we stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to the audience. If some of them want to reach out to you, is neumabeing.com, is that the best?
NeumaBeing.com is the well-being tech startup that we are running, or drop a note at hello@NEUMASCAPE.com. I think you can put it in the description, and you can send your questions and reach out, and I'd be happy to have a chat.
Thank you, everyone, and thanks for watching this video. Please remember to like if you found this informative, and I'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.